Good evening, church. Believe it or not, this is the last night of our gospel meeting. I was talking to Cody before services began, and it is hard to believe that we have went through 4 lessons, 4 nights, 4 days, whatever the case may be already. And it has been so much of a blessing to me, and I hope it has been a blessing to you also, as we end this last night of our gospel meeting. First off, I'm so grateful for this opportunity that I have to stand for you all here this evening. This is my second year in a row being involved in this meeting, and each year it feels like I've grown more preparing these lessons, and I hope that it'll be a blessing unto you all here this evening. The lesson that we have for our last night of this gospel meeting is over Romans chapter 14, 1 through Romans 15, 14. Romans chapter 14, 1 through 15, 14. We'll be bouncing around in Romans 14 and 15 here this evening. And the lesson that I picked out was living sacrifices, holding up the weak, putting others' needs ahead of our own. Holding up the weak, putting others' needs ahead of our own. You know, whenever I was first looking at what lesson that I wanted to choose, you know, this one always kind of stuck out to me because I felt like this is something that I definitely needed to improve on. So I hope that at the end of this lesson, it will be beneficial to you as it was to me. To get us started here this evening, I would like to read from Romans chapter 14, verse 8. Romans chapter 14 and verse 8. Verse 8, it says, "For if we live for the Lord, or if we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's." It says that if we live for the Lord. Us other Christians, if we live for the Lord. If we die for the Lord. Whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. We are His people. You know, and to be His people, you know, we have to make a choice. You know, Brad was talking last night about, you know, as what he does in this, the young kids class on Sunday evenings. And he asked the young kids, he says, every day we got a choice. And what is the choice that we need to do? And that's to do the next right thing. As Christians, that's what we need to do. We need to do the next right thing in our lives. As the decisions come up. I'd also like to read from Romans 15, and I'd like to read the first 7 verses in that. Romans 15, 1 through 7. "Now, we who are strong ought to bear the witnesses of those without strength, and not just please ourselves. Each of us is to please his neighbor for his good and his edification. For even Christ did not please himself, because it is written, 'The taunts of those who taunt you have fallen on me.' For whatsoever was written in earlier times was written for our instruction, so that through perseverance and the encouragement of Scriptures we might have hope. But now may the God who gives perseverance and encouragement grant you to be of the same mind with one another according to Christ Jesus, so that with one purpose and one voice we may glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ." Therefore, accept one another, just as Christ also accepts us for the glory of God. You know, this verse says that those of us who are strong in the faith, they need to help out those who are not as strong as some. We need to put others' needs ahead of our own. You know, sometimes Keely, she asked me, why did you volunteer to do that? You know you ain't got the time to do that. Or you know you're going to be stressed out when you do that. Why would you volunteer to do that? Not talking about this, but other things. And no, she wouldn't say that about this, but other things. And I was just and I tell her, I'm just trying to be a good Christian person. I'm trying to help the person out, or whatever the case may be. So us as Christians, we need to put others' well-being, others ahead of ourselves, physically and spiritually, but most spiritually. As I was picking out this lesson, my mind went back into probably about 5 years ago, whenever me and Keely first started coming here for the first time. It feels like it hasn't been that long, but the years keep ticking by, and to see the person that I was then and the person that I am now, even though I do look like I'm 10 years younger in that picture, but the person that I was then, I'd like to talk about that person for a minute. I feel like that person there, he was spiritually weak. I feel like he was spiritually weak. He was searching for an answer there. And I'm so thankful, so thankful for the ones who helped me find the answers to the questions that I had. A lot of people in this room, some people that are not in this room or in this auditorium tonight helped me, and I'm so thankful for that. Most of y'all probably know this, but right before me and Keely first started coming here, me and Keely were just dating at the time, and it was when I first started slashing around the ideas in my head about the Church of Christ and different things. And for those of you who do not know, before I became a member of the Church of Christ, I did go to a Baptist church, but that's not the point I'm getting at here. But I'm so thankful for the people that came into my life and to give me the Bible scriptures that I needed, the encouragement that I needed, and to help me become stronger in my faith. And that had a lot to do with a lot of people in this room. And I feel like that if there was someone in this auditorium tonight that the members of Southside Church of Christ knew that they were spiritually weak or needed to be spiritually stronger, that they would do anything in their life to help them. It was May 6th, 2021. I had to do a little research to find that out, but it was May 6th, 2021 when I got baptized. It is now 2025, and I feel like that I am spiritually stronger than I was back then. Now, and this is not me bragging. I want to make that point definitely clear. This is not me bragging on the work that I've done. But this is how we should notice people who are spiritually weak in the faith. We should look for people who need our help as Christians and identify these people. To help identify these people, I feel like we need to look to our role model. And I think it was my last lesson that I stood up here. I talked about a little bit about role models, and I looked at these younger kids, and I remember saying, we all have role models in our lives, but there is all one role model that we can have to pattern our lives after. And Roger, thank you for those songs, because they went around perfectly with the lesson that I'd picked out, but that I'd put together. But there's one role model in our lives that we can pattern our lives after, and that role model is Christ. That is the one role model in our lives that we can look at at the things that he done, how he reacted to different situations in our life. So if you want to know here tonight, how do you find these spiritually weak people? What do I do when I find these spiritually weak people? We're going to find out what Christ had to say when you find these spiritually weak people. So let's look to our role model for a minute. Matthew chapter 25. Matthew chapter 25, verses 35 through 40. Verse 35, it says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? And when did you see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And the king will answer and say to them, "Truly I say to you, the extent of that you did to the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me." What's he saying here? Christ is saying here, if we find someone that is hungry and we give them something to eat, or thirsty and we give them something to drink, or a stranger and we invite them in, or naked and we find something to clothe them with, or visit them, whatever the case may be, if we do these things, then he says, "You did it for me." That is what our role model had to say about finding the ones that are weak in faith, helping the ones out who need help, physically and spiritually also. Christ says that if we help these people out, that we did it for him. That's something that needs to stick out in our minds. There's also as I was studying this, there was a story that stood out in my mind, and the story that it reminded me so much of how us as Christians should act when we see these people that need our help. It's in Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10, verses 30 through 35. Luke chapter 10, verses 30 through 35. Very well-known story. And if you think of someone who's in help, this is a story that we all probably go to. Jesus replied and said, "A man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he encountered robbers. Encountered robbers. And they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead." Stop right there. It said a man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, encountered robbers. They stripped him, they beat him half dead, and left him there. Let's not, I want you to think in your minds. You know, I'm always the type of person that likes to think things out in their minds. But I want you to think in their minds, what if I ran upon this person? We don't know the story, but what if I came across this person? Think about that for a minute. Verse 31. By coincidence, a priest was going down on the road, and when he saw, he passed by on the other side. All right? So there's one person, a priest, supposed to be a spiritual person. Verse 32. Likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. All right? So there's two people passed by him. But a Samaritan, who was on a journey, came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion. What is compassion? Passion is love, isn't it? He felt love for this person. Verse 34. He came to him, bandaged him up, his wounds, poured oil and wine on them, and he put them on his own animal and brought him into an inn to take care of him. This verse always gets me. So he comes to the man, he felt compassion, felt love on him, bandaged up his wounds, poured oil and wine over him. Now this next part is the part that gets me. Puts him on his own animal. Now we don't know if he had another animal, and whatever the case may be. But he has so much love, so much compassion for this person. Puts him on his own animal, in his own property. Puts him there. And then goes from there. In verse 35, on the next day, he took out 2 denarii. He gave it to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him. Whatever more you spend, when I return, I will repay you." We'll just go ahead and read through. I want to go ahead and read through verse 37. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? And he said, the one who showed compassion to him. Jesus said, "Go and do the same." Go and do the same. This story here that we have just went over. Whenever I read this story, this came out to me as the ultimate way that we can show, or that we can help a brother that is spiritually downtrodden, spiritually weak, and we can help them. When you think of this story, the man he was on a traveling mission from Jerusalem to Jericho. He encountered robbers, a Levite who was supposed to be a spiritual man, passed him by. A priest, they were supposed to be one of the highest people back in this town, spiritually, passed him by. But a Samaritan, we all know this story, a Samaritan who was on a journey, came upon him, saw, and he felt love for that person. What we need to get out of this story is that when we come in contact with someone that is spiritually weak, that needs help, we need to feel compassion, love for them, like this Samaritan felt for this man here. We need to feel compassion. We need to feel love for that person. But he didn't stop there. He could have just stopped there, but he didn't. He come upon him and he bandaged him up. All right, so he's using some of his property here. All right, he's using some of the things that he has. Bandaged him up, pour oil and wine on him. That was probably costed him money also. So he's using things that he's bought and he's helping the man. And then he put him on his own animal. Again, that to me, that just shows the ultimate act of love right there, because there was no, the Bible doesn't say how long that they went to make it to the end that they stayed in. So he walked and let the man who was down right on his animal. That is the ultimate act of love and caring and compassion for someone. It says on the next day he took out 2 denarii. If I'm not mistaken, that was, maybe wrong, but it was about a half day's wages. And then gave it to the innkeeper and said, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will return when I return, I will repay you. So now he's physically giving this innkeeper money and saying, take care of this man, whatever he needs, do it for him. And then if it's not enough what I gave you, whenever I come back, I'll settle it up. I'll square the debt. That to me is the ultimate show of love, ultimate show of compassion. And that is how we should feel whenever we come in contact with someone who is spiritually down. We should do whatever the cost to help them. Whenever I came here and I was spiritually down, you all helped me in immense ways that I couldn't understand at the time. But now, this man needed help, and this Samaritan helped him. There's some other things that we learn from this story. Is the attack. You know, a man was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho and is ambushed by robbers who stripped, beaten, and left half dead. We don't know if this man was still conscious whenever the priests and the Levites came around, if he was asking them for help, whatever the case may be. But they see him there. They see him half dead. They go around on the other side. And then the Levite comes, sees him there, see him half dead. They go around on the other side. Think if that guy knew that these two people, who were supposed to be spiritual people, walked around him. And that leads us into our next point. A priest and a Levite, both respected religious figures, see the injured man and pass by on the other side. They don't have love for that man. And then, number 3 is something I've been really trying to drive home, and that's the Samaritan's compassion. A Samaritan, a group who generally disliked by the Jews, comes, feels pity, feels love, tends to the man's wounds with oil and wine, puts him on his own donkey, and takes him to an inn where he needs to go. What's a lesson we get from this? Now, Jesus asked the expert in the law, which of these three was a neighbor? And the man answers, the one who has mercy on him. Jesus tells him, go and do likewise. So when we see someone who's spiritually down, we need to do what Jesus tells us to do. We need to go and do as we would want someone to do for us. We need to be a neighbor to that person. Jesus expounds the definition of neighbor beyond family or fellow countrymen to include anyone in need, even an enemy. Ooh, that strikes deep, don't it? Even an enemy. What if this person that we see that is spiritually down, spiritually weak, is someone that we, I hate to use the word despise, but don't like? What if it's that? What if it's someone that we don't like, someone that we have had either run-ins with the past or whatever the case may be? What do we do then? Jesus says in the last verse, verse 37, go and do the same. That's what he was trying to tell them here. Go and do the same. Jesus shows love in action. The story emphasizes that true love for God and others is demonstrated through merciful, compassionate acts, not just religious observance and status. So when we come in contact with someone who's spiritually weak, we need to show them merciful, compassionate acts. Show them that we care for that person, that we care for them, that we love them. When we do. Compassion is act, not feeling. Love, you show when you love someone, don't you? Compassion is act, not feeling. Samaritan didn't just feel sorry. He put his compassion into action. He acted at personal cost, time, money, risk. The Samaritan helped with the man's well-being in his mind and acted as a Christian should, show true righteousness and how he helps when there is no reward. With love in our lives, with love in our hearts, we should want to show the love of Christ like Christ showed love. We should want to show love like Christ showed love, and the way that he did was through his life, his whole ministry. You know, there's a core message behind this lesson. You know, we have the power to choose. We do. We have the power to choose free will. And upholding the weak is not optional. It is a proof of love. According to Jesus, the question is not who deserves my help, but will I become a neighbor? At the end of the parable, Jesus says this, which of these three was a neighbor? The answer was one who had mercy on him. Jesus says, go and do likewise. Jesus tells us to have mercy on the weak. We need to practice this in our lives and uphold and help sustain the weak in their daily walk with Christ. I know that Michael mentioned Romans 8 last night, so I'm going to go ahead and turn to Romans 8 and read verses 13 and 14, and then skip on down and read two other verses. Romans chapter 8. I'm going to read verses read verses 13 and 14, and then skip on down and read verses 18 and 19. So Romans chapter 8, verses 13 and 14. Verse 13, it says, for you are living in according with the flesh. If you're going to die, then you are going to die. But if you're by the Spirit, you're putting to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are being led by the Spirit of God are sons and daughters of God. Are we being led by the Spirit if we help someone who is spiritually weak? Of course we are. We are being led by the Spirit. That is what Christ wants us to do. Help the people get to know Him if they don't, or get to know Him better. Verses 18 and 19. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the eagerly awaiting creation waits to the revealing of the sons and daughters of God. As I prepare to close here this evening, I'd like to offer a challenge. Not really a challenge, but just, I guess you could call it a little bit of homework. We are ending this meeting tonight over the book of Romans. What a wonderful meeting that has been. And it has brought out a lot of things in Romans, to me personally, that I was not aware that was in there. But whenever, for the sake of time tonight, whenever we leave and you go home throughout this next week, I'd like for you to turn to Romans 15 and read to Romans 14 and read verses 14 and 15. And how a Christian should act to those who are weak in the faith. Paul tells us here to keep one another in check, to make sure that we do both. And if we see someone weak spiritually, then we need to be like the Good Samaritan, go above and beyond for that person, show them love in our hearts. Romans gives us a good outline of how to treat the weak and the downtrodden in faith. And let's not just limit how we show this love to these downtrodden, these people that are weak in the faith. Let's not just limit that here at Southside. Let's not just don't do it out in the world. Let's not just do it here in Southside. Let's go and do it out in the world also. If we see someone who is down in the faith, if we see someone who needs our help, go and do it. Go and do whatever you can for that person. I hope this week of these 4 nights of these talented men has been a blessing unto you as much as it was unto me. Bringing these God-inspired and beneficial lessons, that has been so uplifting for me. And as we close, I'd like to mention a couple things. First, I'd like to echo what each and every brother has said that has stood up here. Romans, God's power to save all who believe. That is the name of this series of lessons that we have gained. And we need to recognize the beauty of our salvation. And that is that if we are the weak in the faith, we have a risen Savior who has come for the weak and the strong, just as He doesn't care if you're slaved or free, Jew or Gentile. It does not matter to Him. He came for you, and He came for me. And that is the beauty of our salvation. That is the beauty of what we believe. Paul says in Romans, He came for the Jew and Gentile alike. But also, there's a choice that we have to make. And I thought about doing what Brad did as I walk off the podium saying, do the next right thing, and then just walk off the podium kind of like Brad did, but I decided not to. I decided to let that be his thing. But we have a choice to make each and every day. That is to help someone spiritually, help the weak, help the downtrodden, help them. Make that a mission of ours. The book of Romans surrounds this book of Romans surrounds that to God's power to save all who believe. If you've never got into the book of Romans and you've never truly studied in the book of Romans thoroughly, I very advise you to do that because it has been a blessing to me as I've been able to do that here these past few months. But if you're here tonight and you are spiritually downtrodden, you feel like that you need a spiritual uplifting, or if you've never even made a profession of faith, come now. as we stand and as we sing.